black storm coming. See the lightning strike. Black people rising.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and for those of you who are new to the show, the purpose of the Umoja Circle is to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as black people in America. Here at the Umoja Circle, there's a number of reasons why I always incorporate past events, like I said at the beginning of the previous show, in our history here in America to help me in my discussions pertaining to today's issues. And one of the issues that is always up, especially like what's going on with education in states like Florida and other places where the Republican control the kind of information that our children have access to, especially when it comes to the history of us as a people, and pushing certain types of mythologies that doesn't put us in a good light. That's why I try to bring books that many of you might not have heard of, but you might not always find. You won't always find things in on Google or Facebook or places like that. Sometimes you have to go to books. And one book I want to introduce you to is this book today. This is part 2 of my discussion on this book. It's called, has an interesting title called Jim Crow's Pink Slip. It's a very interesting title, and the untold stories of black principals and teachers. And the reason I say this is because today, again, I will look at the present, then I reflect on the past to better understand this present moment. There is, out of the 2.3 million, I'm gonna just read the statistics that got me interested in that book. Out of the 2.3 million teachers here in America, less than 7% are black. I wonder why is that? Out of the 90,000 principals today in our public school systems, less than 11% are black principals. Out of the 13,800 superintendents across America, only 3% are black. Now, many of you might not know this history and the way black people are vilified, that somehow we don't understand education, or our mental capacity is not the same, and we always about the thug life and all this nonsense. You'll find that that's not true. That's just a lie. But unless you do the research, unless you do what is necessary to gather the information, that's why I do this show. Okay, to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce facts. That's part of my mission statement here at the Umoja Circle. And this book was written by this sister here, Dr. Leslie Fenwick. She's a master teacher. She is a master, she's the Dean Emerita at Howard University School of Education. She's taught from kindergarten all the way up to K-12. She's taught in many colleges, black historically black colleges and historically white colleges. So she has the background, and she's on the committee that put together the information that you find in the African American museum that was just opened up a couple of years ago. She was on the committee that decided what kind of thing that will be put in there. So the sister got the research chops, okay? And as a dean at Howard, she got the skills. and she's open. I said in the last show that the reason that she went down this path was because of what she heard when she was in grad school, getting her doctorate degree first time, okay, many years ago. And the professor brought up a lot of statistics that were really based on false narratives, but that's what was being taught. Okay, still, when it comes to who we are as people of African descent, the mythology is still negative, and it doesn't fit the historical facts. And she went searching the historical facts, and she came across this Senate subcommittee. And based on what she found in that and her own research, she started this book. But let me talk about this book. I got a little slide here. I want to talk about who she really is. Okay, that's the cover of the book. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, it's based on what happened after the 1954 Civil Rights Act. 1954 Civil Rights, that's 10 years later, 1964. We talk about 1954 Brown versus the Board of Education, which had everything to do with the segregation in schooling. But regrettably, as documented in the congressional testimony, that's what I'm talking about in 1971, and transcript, it also ended the careers of a generation of highly qualified and credentialed black teachers and principals in the Deep South and northern border states. And that's like Virginia and Maryland, over places like that, over the decades following Brown. Black schools were illegally closed. Black educators were displaced en masse. As the educational policies and leadership expert, Leslie T. Fenwick definitely demonstrate the effects of these changes stand contrary to the democratic ideas of an integrated society and an equal educational opportunity for all students. In other words, white America cheated us again. From the time of 1952 to well into the 1970s, over 100,000 highly credentialed black principals, black superintendents, and black teachers lost their jobs, were fired. There was excuses used that this person was incompetent. Well, these people had doctorate degrees. They had master's degrees. Because of the dual educational system, they had to make sure that they had all their eggs in a row. And if they came from a state like a Mississippi or Alabama, where they had great education in historically black institutions, but if they didn't have a place where you get your law degree or a place where you get your medical degree, you couldn't go because of segregation. You couldn't go to, a white law school or all-white medical school in Mississippi or Alabama or parts of Louisiana. You had to go out. You had to migrate. We had to have that brain drain going from places like Mississippi, but blacks did it. And they went to schools like NYU, New York University, or University of Chicago, or Columbia University, or Ohio State, places like University of Iowa. They had to take these roundabout ways, but they got their doctorates and master's degrees in droves. A large portion of teachers, black teachers in the South, in places like Georgia, 40% of the teachers black teachers were about 40% of the population of educators. And majority of them had their master's degrees and doctorate degrees. Even if they were just teaching middle school, they were highly credentialed. Yet when after Brown versus the Board of Education decision came in, what did the white legislators do? They found reasons to fire these highly educated black people. Instead of incorporating them, they sent our children to these white schools, which Brown didn't say you had to do. We got this impression that it was all right for black people to go into these white schools, yes. But what Brown wanted them to do was to mix up the system, black and white. You know, some white teachers would come into black communities, but that wasn't going to happen with these white racist segregationists who were still in charge even after the Brown versus the Board of Education. In some states, even, again, like Florida, they actually closed down schools for 2 or 3 years rather than follow the decisions of Brown versus the Board of Education. 2 years after the 1954 decision, I read that in 1956, there was another extension of Brown in 1956. And it said that that all these southern states would, these 17 dual systems, and when I said dual systems, segregated whites, segregated blacks school systems, will make that change of Brown of 1954 with all due speed. And guess what the speed was like? Snail's pace. Some of those states still didn't have desegregation into the 70s. That's how slow they went. Some states decided, like I said, like Florida, decided to close their schools, public schools, and open these private academies, which we were for. Since they were private, then they could say, well, we don't have to follow the federal government. These are private institutions, and we will maintain our whites-only prospect. So if you saw Republicans in the last couple of years, especially under Trump and that DeVos person, who was the head of the Secretary of Education under Trump, who was trying to push, privatizing schools, that's what they did in the 1950s, and left blacks and brown people out of those schools. And in places like Florida, black people were left out of the public school system that was shut down by the state rather than follow the policies of Brown that came in 1954 for 2-3 years. But again, we fought back as black people. Okay, I want to understand, we didn't just not accept that. We took them to court. There was a memorandum that was found of Thurgood Marshall because in the book, Dr. Fenwick wondered, didn't Thurgood Marshall and all the NAACP lawyers who fought, who comprised the group that brought about Brown decision in 1954, didn't they understand that there would be a backlash? But we never heard about that. We never talked about that in the history books, Black History Month. Of course they knew about it, but it was not always documented. That's something that we never talked about, that they understood that even though they got this case won, there was always a white backlash with every progress that we made. When we voted during Reconstruction, there was white backlash. How they treated our teachers in 100 years later, there was always a backlash. All right, but we've always fought back. We've always been about education. And Dr. Fenwick found a referendum that Thurgood Marshall wrote at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, where which he led, where he established a separate office that would collect funds because he knew they would have to go to court throughout the South to make sure that Brown's decision was being processed by the state legislature in Georgia and Mississippi and Alabama and places like that. Well, there were 17 states that had this dual system that had to follow the rulings of Brown and fought tooth and nail not to make sure that those things were done. This is America. This is the America you don't hear about. Everybody talk about Brown like, that after that, the land of milk and honey, that the educational system was working for us. When our black children were forced into these schools, predominantly white schools, again, Brown did not say to close down the black schools. Just bring them up to par, give them the proper funding. You send some white teachers in there. Black teacher will go into, the predominantly white school, and there will be a mixture that reflects the America that was supposed to be a land of equality. Of course, that was a pipe dream. It never worked. In fact, many of these teachers, highly qualified teachers that were fired because they were, just for simple say a white superintendent would see a black principal who's doing a great job, got a doctorate degree, the white superintendent that's over him might only have a master's degree. But then that white principal would say when he fires him that this black man or black woman was incompetent. And that's all they needed to get rid of them or demote them. One extreme case was a gentleman I think he was a principal of a one-room school in Georgia, one of the rural areas of Georgia, dirt floor. Those are the things Brown was supposed to change, okay? And what did the school board do? They replaced this man with somebody who was a milkman. They don't care about the kids. They didn't care about the credentials of the white people that they were putting in the places of highly credentialed black teachers. That was the problem. And many of our children who went into the predominantly white school, which was another thing that they had to deal with, were harassed, not by other students only, but by the teachers themselves, the white teachers who still did not want to teach black children, who did not want to even be in the vicinity of us, but we sent them into these schools and got rid of the teachers that for over 100 years nearly have done wonderful things in the black community, regardless of the fact, despite the conditions of the building, despite the conditions of the books, the teaching was still above par. But that was just an excuse for these states to destroy black educational institutions and control the money that they got from the federal government that was supposed to help equalize the school system. That's what Brown did for a lot of folks. And we're still dealing with the ramifications, as I said earlier, of the percentage of people who are in leadership roles, and superintendents and principals, dropped. In the 1940s and as far back as the 1920s, in certain places where black populations were higher, like South Carolina, certain parts of Alabama and Mississippi, you had something like 40% or to 50% of the teachers were black. Yeah, 40 to 50% of the teachers were black and highly credentialed, meaning that 35 to 40% of them had doctorates and at least master sergeants, were in positions of authority okay, as not only as teachers, but as principals and as superintendents of these segregated schools, but they were in these positions of authority, and they all got wiped out between 1954 and the 1970s. All that brain drain was taken out of the black community. And those were highly educated men and women, they got paid. And they went back to the segregated neighborhoods and spent that money that was taken out of the circulation. But what happened to them when they lost their job? You had somebody who had a master's degree in Georgia, who was a teacher, who got fired, but the only thing he could find is a janitorial work. Why? Why? That's the reason they don't want us to teach, API history in Florida, because that's what come out. But we have this mythology of being the land of the free and the home of the brave and equal opportunity. No. When it comes to this color skin, it's always been trauma. And I mean, literally trauma, because when black kids were sent into these predominantly white schools after Brown, again, Brown didn't say to do that. It said that they just got to bring their schools and their communities up to par, but the states closed them and used that as an excuse not to rehire the principals, superintendents, and that money was refunded back to the predominantly white schools. But those black kids made the population in those white community schools double. And then when that happened, they had to hire more teachers. And guess what? They hired white teachers and less credentialed white teachers. Teachers with certificates. Teachers who never been around black children. Teachers who would tear up black homework and tell them to do it over. Teachers who will tell a black student to turn their chairs around and face the back of the walls. This is what our children had to go through when we got desegregated and sent into these predominantly white institutions. I'm talking about elementary school, I'm talking about junior high school. I'm talking about high school. And you think you will be learning under these conditions properly? Or schools being closed, high schools in areas of a state like Florida because they didn't want to deal with the deliberate speed that was told to them by the Supreme Court when they went again to enforce Brown. They went by all deliberate speed, like I said earlier, and that was very slow speed, a very, very, very problematic for us. So you're wondering why we dealt with. And then you have the audacity to say that you are that black people don't care about education, that black people don't have the mental capacity. Because this is what the author of this book said, that she was getting it in a graduate school in the late 80s when she was getting her doctorate degree. That's the kind of stuff that was being taught to her in politics, and I think it was a politics and education class that she was taking. That's why she started this research slowly. I have a book right next to me here. I'm put up on the screen. It's called The Education of Blacks in the South from 1860 to 1935, okay? And this is another book that you need to get. Beside the Jim Crow pink slips. This book will tell you how blacks, under the condition of Jim Crow apartheid, created public school systems that also benefited the poor white kids. Because there was no public school system before the Civil War. No, black were about education. Blacks were about education. And this book will tell you what we did for the South. That's where we got these HBCUs. It was because the predominantly white ex-Confederates didn't want us still to be around them. So we created our own schools. We created that system where our black teachers would get their degrees and then go migrate to wherever they could get their higher degrees and come back to the South. And this was a tradition that was going on until Brown versus the Board of Education, and all that system was pretty much destroyed by the same people who forced them to create that system to get their education. Blacks have always been about education. When the end of the Civil War and the so-called 13th Amendment came about, I think the illiteracy rate amongst black people who were enslaved and by law were not allowed to be educated or even read. Look at what happened to Frederick Douglass, okay? He had to trick his slaveholder's wife to teach him how to read because it was illegal when he was a kid. Illegal to educate him, but we still persevered because that's who we are. We've always been about education, and our children are not being taught that. We think that our children are more interested in superficial stuff. We've always been about education as a people. And this not only started in America, this came with us on those enslavement ships, because all across the west coast of Africa, when you had those great empires, they were about educating. Mali, Songhai, the great empire of Ghana, all of them had highly literate people, and that's who we descend from. We were disconnected from it for a little while because of enslavement, but we knew who we are. And we know who we are, and we're still dealing with this issue as we deal. Talk about Governor DeSantis as an example of another obstacle. What have we learned? And how long are we gonna let these people do that to us? You know, we did fight back. Don't think we just accepted this. We went to court over and over and over again as a people. You know, the NAACP Defense Fund fought back. But as usual, time ran out. I hope I perked your interest. So peace, hotep, bye-bye.